Do you have a banger workout session that we could make to show people on Instagram?
I think just like a bread and butter interval that I've done for almost my entire career is just like a 15-minute zone 3 spiked workout. And you can break that down into many different ways, but basically that's a workout that hasn't really changed over my entire career. You do, zone 3 for say 2 minutes 30, then you do a 30-second spike quite above threshold, come back to that zone 3, repeat to make 15 minutes.
And how many do you do of those?
Maybe 2 to 3.
Awesome.
So like 30 to 45 minutes of total work.
Cool. And just out of curiosity, when you talked before about executing the train, is there anything that you're looking like, hey, I really want to be able to do this spiking, come right back into the tempo? Or is that overthinking it? Or is it just like do it by feel where you're like, hey, I'm out of the saddle, I'm back, I'm cruising, I'm like at a good clip? Or is there anything in your brain that's like, that was a good session, or something that might be like, nah, I didn't really execute that well?
It would probably be more the feeling. So it would be like, once I've done that spike and then I come back down to the zone 3, what does that feeling feel like? Do I feel like I'm metabolizing and clearing that lactate and I'm now comfortable in that zone 3? Or do I spend majority of that 2.5 minutes still suffering a little bit? And how high can I push that zone 3 where I feel like I'm recovering?
And so is this, you said this is like something you've done over your career. Is it something that you do very often within the season? Like, is this along with endurance rides, like you're doing these spike tempo rides pretty often?
With my coach, we mix it up quite a bit. So it's not something that I would do all the time, and it gets broken down into many different ways. Like the other day, I did one that was not as aggressive, where it was more like 2 minute zone 3, 3 minutes threshold for 20 minutes. So that was a slightly less explosive kind of workout, but we do a lot of this sort of rhythm changes in training. So it's something that's used a lot, but it's not necessarily the exact same template that is used over and over and over again.
Cool. Keeps it fresh. Any VO2 max training that sticks out?
So yeah, we do in two ways. So obviously there's a lot of research now showing that more of the Tabata style on-off is a really good VO2 max stimulus. But something that I find living majority of the time in Andorra, and a lot of the training gets done at medium altitude, that my VO2 max power is actually quite a bit lower than it is at sea level. And we like to do steady state VO2 max intervals just to have that muscular stimulus of holding what would be the equivalent of like 6.5 watts per kilo at sea level. I can't do 6.5 watts per kilo at medium altitude for 15 minutes, but I can do it for 3 times 5 minutes, which is then in the VO2 max zone at medium altitude. So that makes sense.
So, okay. So like classic 5-minute VO2. And if I heard you correctly, add a specific wattage at altitude that correlates to what you could do at sea level.
Yeah. And then obviously we also do then the very standard, like I think I have a session coming up, which is maybe 3 times 7 minutes. And those 7 minutes are broken down either into 30-30s, 40-20s, or 20-40s.
Okay. Which do you like better, Tabata or steady state?
Tabata, I think.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. Neither of them are very enjoyable, which is why I hesitated there for a little bit. But maybe the Tabata.
I don't know why. For in my head, I thought like a GC guy would just like steady state, ripping solid power. But maybe the Tabata is more like real racing, so maybe that resonates with your brain. I don't know. That's interesting.
The steady state just always seems like this bit of like a more drawn out suffering process, whereas like the Tabata, it's more of a mentally easier interval.
Okay. My last question on this one, sorry to be so granular. Tabatas, there are some people that talk about them where, say they're doing, let's say 7 30-30s. They're going to go full gas on the first one, knowing that the watts are going to decrease. Or other people are going to go more, try and hit the same wattage across. Maybe you're doing it by RP, like, yeah, this hurts enough. What's your sort of flow through that series?
So if I needed to do 3 by 7 minutes, I would want each interval to more or less have the similar average power. So I don't want to do the first interval and go maximum, but then my last 7 minute interval would be 40 watts less than my first one.
Mm,
So
got it.
it's trying to get more or less the highest average power for the total work, if that makes sense. So like the highest average power for that 21 minutes.
Cool. So I'm like drilling you with watt questions, but maybe more importantly, what's more important? What's more important to you, aerodynamics or more watts in 2025?
Uh, so we have the option of two bikes in Bahrain, where we have a climbing bike and an aero bike. And the aero bike is roughly a 300-gram penalty to the climbing bike. But I race the aero bike probably 80% of the race days. So I prefer to be 300 grams heavier, but to have a faster aerodynamic bike.
How do your friends feel about that?
um, it's definitely taking longer for people to adopt that, because I think we still have such an old school mentality that lighter is always better in cycling. But every single year, I see more and more people converting to want to use the aero frame over the climbing frame for races, just because the speed is so high now in racing.
Has anybody best bike split that? Like just a 300 grams to me is like, that's nothing. Like an empty water bottle is 100. So it's like throw a couple of
So,
gels out and you're good.
so I think I'm now you're testing my memory, but I think we get recommended to use the climbing bike once you go over about 8%
Okay.
in gradient on a climb. So if the final climb, for example, on the stage, an uphill finish was more than 8%, then they would recommend that you take the lighter option. But if it's less than 8%, then they would recommend you take the more aero option.
Interesting. I'd be curious if they thought of like the distance, the total distance, KJs as you were talking about before. Like, what am I going to feel like at the bottom of the climb? I guess
Yeah.
there's just so many variables. There's never going to be a perfect answer.
Yes. So before every stage in a Grand Tour, we get recommended a equipment setup, and this takes into account a lot of things. Like, for example, if it was a 200-kilometer stage and it was 185 kilometers pan flat
Mm-hmm.
with then say a 9% climb for 10 kilometers, then they'd probably still recommend the aero bike. But if
Yeah.
it's a 150-kilometer stage with 4,000 meters of climbing, they would probably recommend the climbing bike.
I love that you guys like rattle off these numbers, 4,000 meters of climbing. It's like just such a crazy number. Um, it's wild. Okay, what's kind of shifting gears here? What do you think is underrated in cycling training?
Enjoyment.
Oh, hell yeah. I don't think anybody's ever said that. That's amazing. That fits perfectly with your personality too. What's overrated then?
Suffering. No. Uh,
Welcome to
what's
the dojo with Jack.
um what's overrated? Complexity.
Okay. Yeah, no, that works. Is there anything that you've gone through off the bike that you had to overcome that you feel like has helped you become a better athlete? An athlete, it could be mountain biker, could be, or maybe just human, but just something that you're like, man, that really toughened me up.
Oh, I've had a couple rehabilitation processes with injuries that I've had, and that's always a little bit complicated and difficult, because especially when you're professional, your or cycling is more or less becomes your identity. And then when that sort of forcefully gets taken away with an injury, it can be quite hard mentally to deal with that time off, especially when you're seeing a lot of your friends or a lot of your competitors maybe doing well, and you're kind of stuck on the sideline, not really being able to do anything. But if you can, it allows you to get an appreciation for something outside of cycling and something outside of the job. And I think that's kind of helped me along the way to find a bit of a healthy balance between me as a cyclist and me as a person.
I love that. And that's a tip that so many people that go through injuries will be able to kind of apply and remember. So there's someone that's going to hear that, and that definitely will motivate them to get through that period because it's not fun.